The cockpit was a furnace of red light and warning tones. Captain Aaron Walker's gloved thumb held the stick steady as the F-117 shivered in dirty air above the hostile corridor. The RWR spat angry spikes at her, threat sectors filling like a rising tide. Below, invisible on night vision screens she couldn't see, a C-17 was threading the gap she'd just torn open. "Echo, you're spiking 3 radars, Maji." Cole's voice snapped over secure. "You're naked out there." "C-17 stays clean," Aaron said, jaw tight. "They look at me." Another tone, higher, needling, told her what she already knew. One of those spikes had locked. Old jet, old shaping, new enemy software. Nobody believed this Batwing could live in a modern threat ring. She rolled a degree, presenting the wrong angle on purpose, feeding the SAM operators a target they couldn't resist. The jet vibrated, frame older than her career, but it held. "Break out, Echo," towered a calmer voice. "Mission complete." Not yet. Aaron sent the F-117 deeper, shoulders pressed into the seat, sweat cooling under the flight suit. In the black glass ahead, the desert was just absence. If somebody had to be the ghost, everyone forgot. It would be her. 72 hours earlier, Tonopah Test Range, Nevada. The hangar door crawled upward, letting in a blade of white desert glare that ran across the F-117's black facets. Aaron stood just outside the line of light, helmet under her arm, and let her eyes move over the jet the way you look at someone you might have to trust with your life. The skin was matte, anti-reflective, the angles still alien decades after the program had ended. Dust from Tonopah streaked the floor, but maintainers had wiped the Nighthawk clean like they knew today mattered. "Captain Walker." Colinar Ramirez's voice carried that clipped, test-range patience. He was in flight suit, zipper open at the throat, tablet in hand. Behind him, Maj. Cole leaned on a tool cart, watching. The ops guys always watched her a fraction longer. "Sir," she said. Ramirez tapped the tablet. "Today's a full-up systems and low-power taxi. You clear that? I sign you current. You don't? We slide Lieutenant Green up." Green, younger, male, loud about how he'd rather be on F-35s. Aaron kept her face neutral. "I'll clear it," she said. Cole smirked, not unkind, but not warm. "Weather gods love you today, Echo. 10-knot cross. Hot. Let's see if the antique likes it." Antique. Old jet. That was the subtext in every room when the F-117 came up. The Air Force bragged about Raptors, about B-21s coming, about drones learning to think. Nobody bragged about the Batwing kept alive in Nevada. Nobody bragged about the woman flying it. She climbed the ladder, boots clanking on metal. Inside, the cockpit smell hit. Electrical, a faint tang of hydraulic fluid, something sun-baked. She strapped in fast, muscle memory from other airframes mapping itself onto this one. Hands were steady, no room for shaking. "Tonopah ground, Echo 1, cockpit checks," she said into the mask. Ramirez answered from the ground loop. "Echo 1, you're cleared to run." She brought the jet to life in sequence, watching lights wink, listening for anything that sounded wrong. The F-117 talked in its own way. Slow, deliberate, this works. That's warmed up. Outside, she caught Cole walking around, pretending to check panels, actually listening. Internal heat rose, a tightness behind her ribs. Not fear, exposure. If she missed a step, if a pump cycled late, if she called for maintenance, they would write that down in the invisible column labeled reassigned female pilot. She ran it clean. "Checklist complete," she said. Ramirez's voice softened by a millimeter. "Copy, taxi." She released brakes. The jet rolled, nose twitching at the crosswind. ROE today wasn't about weapons. It was about profile discipline. This aircraft survived by staying predictable at the right times and utterly unpredictable at the others. Even here, in the home desert, she honored that. At the turn, a gust pushed, more than 10 knots. Nose wanted to weather vane. Erin fed rudder, small, uncompensated. The jet obeyed. She didn't overcorrect. That was flying, not fighting the machine, but telling it quietly what to do. Ground came back. Echo 1, looks good. Bring her back. She taxied in, parked, ran shutdown. The cockpit went from red and alive to warm and still. For a moment she sat there, gloved hands on her thighs, and let the silence pour in. Her father had sat in tighter spaces, higher, faster, where the sky was purple. He'd come home to no applause, classified. She was walking the same corridor. On the floor, Ramirez waited. When she descended the ladder, he signed the tablet, then met her eyes. "You're current," he said. "Briefing room in 20. We just got an intel update, and you're going to want to see it." Cole pushed off the cart. "Guess the antique still runs." Erin let a corner of her mouth lift. "Depends who's flying it, Major." She walked toward the briefing room, helmet under her arm, boots loud on concrete. Desert heat pressed from the open hangar, but inside her there was a cooler place, built from every time she'd been told no. Today had not been no, and if they were updating intel, that meant the mission wasn't theory anymore. The briefing room was windowless, cold, and already full when Erin stepped in. Projectors hummed at the ceiling, painting the front wall with sat imagery and threat rings in angry bands of red and yellow. A coffee smell hung over everything, burnt, old, like it had been sitting since 0400. Ramirez stood up front in front of the big screen, flight-suited, sleeves rolled. To his right was Captain Mark Ellis from Intel, a man whose neatly parted hair and narrowed eyes said, "Data first, pilots second." A couple of ops guys looked up as Erin entered, tracked her, the half-second longer look again. She took a seat near the wall, helmet on the floor, back straight. "All right," Ramirez said, voice cutting through murmurs. "This is now a live planning session. We got updated ISR at 0340. Enemies rotating a mobile radar battalion into the northern sector of the corridor." Ellis clicked. The image changed. Desert, a road like a scar, new icons popping up. "That's newer gen search radar," Ellis said. "They've patched some of the gaps we liked 3 days ago. If we push a conventional stealth profile through here, they might get intermittent paints. Not enough to shoot, but enough to spook the package." "Which is why," one of the ops majors said, "we shouldn't be sending an obsolete stealth jet in the first place." The room didn't react, but Erin felt the words like a tap to the sternum. Obsolete stealth jet. He didn't say, with a female pilot, because he didn't have to. It floated there anyway. Ramirez didn't look at the major. "We're sending it because it looks wrong on their screens," he said. "They tuned for signature families they know. They didn't tune for something they think is in a museum." Ellis hesitated. "Sir, survivability is still—" "Survivability," Ramirez said. "Goes up if the pilot keeps MCON, hits her time on target, and doesn't get chatty." Her. The room's eyes shifted to Erin for a heartbeat. She kept her face still, pen in hand, as if she were just another pilot taking notes. Inside, the old irritation heated. Not rage, not anymore, just a coiled sense of, "I will show you." Ellis zoomed into the target complex. "Primary node is here. Power and comms for the sector. B2 can hit it, but ROE requires confirmation of PID and low collateral. That means a designator in close. drone isn't going to cut it with this jamming. So we send the F-117 to Lacey, the skeptical major said. In 2025? Ramirez nodded once. Yes, we do. Erin let herself focus on the image, not the voices. Approach heading, terrain masking possibilities, the rhythm of radars sweeping. She could see the ingress like a line through dark water. The F-117 was old, but physics was timeless. Angles, timing, emissions. Her father had flown faster than missiles could think. She would fly quieter than radars could notice. Ellis went on. C-17 will follow through this window, 10 minutes after strike, to pull out the package. They need a clean corridor. Any radar looking the wrong way at the wrong time jeopardizes them. That was the real weight. Not the B-2's bomb release, but the people in the cargo jet who couldn't maneuver, couldn't hide. She felt her throat tighten. Not sentimentality, just the stark math of who gets hit first. Questions? Ramirez asked. The ops major raised a hand. Yes. What's our contingency if the F-117 is detected? Do we have a second designator? No, Ramirez said. We have Captain Walker. Silence. That was the turn. Quick, irreversible. He'd said it out loud in front of Intel, Ops, everyone. There wasn't going to be another pilot sliding into her seat if things got warm. She felt the shift in herself. A small, sharp acceptance. This is mine now. No backing out for fuel comfort. No, the plan changed. Her name was now welded to the concept. ROE is tight, Ellis added. No ordnance from the F-117. Designate only. Self-defense if fired upon. But we'd rather you stay dark and slippery. Dark and slippery. Like something half-remembered from a different era. She could do that. Erin spoke then, voice level. What's the expected rotation rate on the mobile unit? Every eye turned again, but now it was because she was participating, not because she was an anomaly. If they're moving on a 6-hour cycle, we can hit the seam. Ellis looked at his tablet. 4-hour last night. Might be shorter under alert. Then we go lower on ingress, she said. Cut exposure time. I can keep emissions cold until IP. The ops major opened his mouth, but Ramirez lifted a hand. Logged, he said. We'll model it. For now, Captain Walker is primary designator. He killed the projector. The room brightened slightly. Chairs scraped. Men in flight suits stood talking low. No one congratulated her. No one said, "Glad you're on it." That was fine. Quiet fortitude wasn't about applause. It was about doing the job so clean they couldn't find a place to doubt you. Erin picked up her helmet and followed Ramirez out, already walking the route in her head, already trimming the ingress, already making room for fear, not to rule, just to ride shotgun. The Intel vault wasn't dramatic. No red lasers, no sci-fi glow. Just a narrow room behind 2 badged doors, air conditioning turned down to Arctic, and rows of binders and terminals that hummed like distant engines. Erin signed the log, clipped the visitor tag to her flight suit, and stepped inside. She had 40 minutes before SIM. The sergeant on duty barely looked up. "You're here for the D-class packet, ma'am?" "Yeah, the F-117 Legacy one," she said. He pointed with his chin. "Left station. Some of it's still blacked." Of course it was. She moved to the terminal, sat, and pulled the cold keyboard closer. On screen, the index was a mix of acronyms and dates. F-117 Developmental, Kosovo Strike, Desert Years. Below that, older entries. SR-71 Strategic Reconnaissance, 1970s, 1980s, selected mission summaries. Her chest tightened. She shouldn't have clicked. This wasn't what she was here for, but her fingers moved anyway, opening the older folder like she'd been guided. The screen filled with scanned pages, grainy typewriter text, signatures. At the top, high-altitude overflight, successful, loss of platform avoided. Further down, crew, Major Daniel Walker, RSO, Lieutenant Cole P. Harmon, pilot. She didn't breathe for a second. Daniel Walker, her father. RSO, not pilot. He'd always said the back seat was where the real work was done. He'd said it with a smile that had something tucked behind it, something she'd been too young to read. She scrolled, pulse louder than the air vent. Platform experienced hostile radar search, grew in intensity. Crew elected to maintain course to complete imagery collection. Platform egressed at high Mach. Mission classified. Commendation filed at higher. That was it. No medal list, no photo, no public citation. Just a line saying he'd stayed in the envelope when the smart move would have been to turn away. Because the job wasn't done. Because somebody on the ground needed that imagery. Her father had died years later. Another mission. Another report that came to the house like a shadow. Her mother had cried in the kitchen. Erin had watched from the hallway, small and furious, at the idea that the world got to call her father's work classified and move on. Now she was staring at the same pattern, decades later. Old platform, hostile radar waking up, somebody deciding to stay anyway. Erin switched to the F-117 folder, throat still tight. Here were flight profiles, signature charts, notes from engineers long retired. Stealth isn't invisibility, it's probability management. Angles deflect, timing survives. It was all so rational on the page. Out there, it would be sweat and noise and alarms. She pulled a yellow notepad closer and began sketching. Inbound route, SAM rings, the seam she'd suggested in briefing. On the margin she wrote, almost without thinking, SR-71 stayed. Under that, F-117 will stay. The door opened behind her. Boots. She didn't turn. You chasing ghosts, Captain? It was Madge, Cole's voice amused. Just history, she said, eyes on the screen. He came around her shoulder, hands tucked in his sleeves against the cold. He nodded at the SR-71 file. Old stuff, different world. Same math, she said. Someone has to go in first so someone else can finish. He looked at her, really looked this time, and she felt him put something together. The name, the folder, the line in her file he might have skimmed once. Walker, he said, softer. Your old man. He was in that community, right? She didn't answer directly. He didn't get a parade. Cole's mouth tightened in something like respect. Most of the good ones don't. He left it there, which she appreciated. No pity, no, I'm sorry for your loss, decades too late. Just acknowledgement. She could work with that. She saved a copy of the F-117 signature chart to the mission drive, logged out of the SR-71 file. As the screen blanked, the cold air felt less sharp. This wasn't an accident. The Air Force kept old things quiet, but it also kept them ready, in case the future needed to borrow the past. Her father had flown higher than the enemy could reach. She would fly lower than they could see. Both were acts of faith in machines people thought were past their time. In the hallway outside, the Nevada heat slapped her again. She blinked, adjusted. Sim was in 10. Tonight they'd model the tighter ingress, the one she'd suggested. That meant less fuel margin, less room for error. Command would sign it because it was clever and because it used the weird airframe. But she was the one who'd be up there, with alarms and dark sky and somebody's life in a C-17 underneath. She felt the old anger soften into something heavier, steadier. Obligation, maybe. Not to the colonel, not to the ops major who didn't believe. to the line of people whose names were blacked out, but who had gone anyway. Quiet fortitude wasn't abstract anymore. It had a call sign, a mission number, a bloodline. Night had flattened the desert into a single dark sheet, the runway lights the only stitched line through it. Erin walked out to the jet with her helmet at her side. NVGs clipped, the air cooler but still smelling of sun-baked concrete. The F-117 sat like a folded shadow, less alien in the dark than in daylight. Here, it belonged. Echo 1, comm check. Majid Cole's voice came through as she climbed the ladder. He was in the squadron ops trailer, running the sortie as controller. Loud and clear, she said, settling into the seat, straps biting. Pre-flight complete. Copy. Profile tonight is ingress to IP, low-level MCON. You get one safety of flight break if you need it. Tower's busy, so expect a hold. Tower was always busy when she flew, or maybe she just noticed more. She lit the jet, marveling again at how it still came alive. Old processors, old wiring, still answering. She taxied out, red lighting turning the cockpit into a submarine. Tonopah Tower, Echo 1, ready for departure. Static then. Echo 1, hold short. Traffic priority inbound. She glanced up. The sky was clear. Training helo somewhere, maybe. Or someone just wanted to keep the black jet out of pattern until things were neat. Copy, holding, she said. Cole came over secure. We can scrub, Walker. Try again tomorrow. There it was. The simple, career-safe choice. RTB, no harm, no foul. Tomorrow someone else could take the slot. Green would be thrilled. Negative, she said, calm. Systems are green, I can hold. They held. Minutes ticked. Fuel burned, not badly, but this was a low-level run. She wanted all of it. She drummed gloved fingers once on her thigh, then stilled them. Quiet. Wait. Tower finally came back. Echo 1, cleared for takeoff, runway 22. Echo 1, rolling. She pushed the throttle, felt the jet gather speed, the desert sliding by in strips of light. Rotation, gear up, and she was in the black, climbing to the initial altitude before the descent to low level. Then the panel blinked. A subsystem caution, not catastrophic, but tied to the nav set they were using to model the real-world ingress. The amber light glowed like an accusation. Cole's voice edged. I see your advisory. Say status. She checked the repeaters, scanned. It wasn't a full failure, more like a misalignment. In the real op, she'd have to trust backup and her own plotting. Advisory only, she said. I can troubleshoot in flight. Or you can RTB, Cole said. This is training. Don't get heroic. It wasn't heroics. It was necessity. If she ran home every time the antique coughed, the ops major in the briefing would get his wish, and the F-117 would go back in the box. She took a breath, let it out slow so it didn't fog her mask. Proceeding with troubleshooting. ROE for tonight's event. Stay dark, no unnecessary emissions, no active radar. So she did it the old way, cross-checking instruments, comparing to pre-briefed waypoints, making a tiny correction with hands that didn't rush. The desert rose to meet her as she descended to low level, the jet humming, the outside world a smear of night. Echo 1, you are off profile by 30 seconds, Cole said. You sure you've got this? I've got it. She nudged power, trimming time without spiking anything. The advisory stayed, but the jet flew true. This was what mattered. Not a clean board, but a pilot who could interpret noise and still deliver. The desert at 500 feet at night was a living thing. Dark ridges, colder air pooling in draws. Her NVGs painted it in ghost green. Any tower wanted her higher. safer. Any planner wanted her precise. The real world wanted her alive. Approaching IP, she said. Cole was quiet for a beat. When he spoke again, the tone had shifted, just slightly. Copy Echo. Simulated target will go hot. Now. She rolled into the virtual point, held the line, imagined the laser designation she'd send in the real mission. In her head, a lumbering C-17 was 10 minutes behind, counting on her to make enemy sensors look the wrong way. Target designated, she said. Silence. Then, profile complete. Climb and return. As she climbed back out, the advisory finally blinked away, a self-clearing glitch. Of course, if she'd run home, it would have fixed itself, and she'd have looked skittish. On recovery, Tower was suddenly friendly. Nice work, Echo 1. Cleared to land. She put the jet down smooth. Back in the hangar, helmet under her arm, she found Cole waiting. He didn't smile this time. He just handed her a clipboard. Ramirez wants you to know that's what he needed to see, Cole said. He's bumping you up. Your lead for the actual. Heat flared in her chest, not giddy, just right. Copy. Cole tilted his head. You could have RTB'd. No, Aaron said. Not with what we're about to do. She didn't have to explain the rest. That old jets deserved pilots who trusted them. That women in cockpits didn't get the luxury of aborting for small things. That the mission didn't care about her feelings. Quiet, steady, proven. That was the only language they listened to. The transport that ferried her forward wasn't glamorous. Just a noisy, hot bird that smelled like canvas, oil, and men who'd been moving cargo all day. Erin sat strapped in with her go-bag between her boots, helmet in her lap, feeling each bump as they crossed into air that wasn't Nevada's. Out the small oval window, the world below turned from open desert to harsher, more broken terrain. The kind where people hid radar trucks. When they landed, the forward operating site was exactly what she'd expected. A runway scraped out of nowhere, a couple of hardened shelters, generators throbbing, and heat that clung even after sunset. No broad hangars, no polished briefing room. A place built to launch things fast and ask questions later. A crew chief in a faded patch met her at the tarmac. Ma'am, you're the Nighthawk? I'm the one flying it, she said. He gave a short, impressed whistle. Didn't think we'd ever see one of those again. Birds inbound on a separate hop. We got a shelter ready, but it's tight. Tight works, Aaron said. What about quarters? He gestured with his chin toward a line of prefab huts. We can stick you with the other officers, ma'am. Or... He glanced toward the maintenance tents, closer to the shelters, louder, less comfortable. If you want to be right on top of your jet, we can set a cot there. That was the moment. She could sleep cool, shower, listen to the ops guys gripe about rules. Or she could listen to generators, tools, and the language of people who kept jets alive in bad places. I'll take the cot, she said. The chief grinned like she'd passed an unspoken test. Yes, ma'am. They walked past pallets of munitions and fuel bladders shimmering in the heat. The shelter that would house the F-117 was low and dusty, camo-netted. This base wasn't designed for a batwing. Everything here expected F-16s, drones, helicopters. But the crews had cleared space anyway. Fuel's gonna be tight, the chief said, businesslike. We got your load, but we don't have your luxury. Tanker support is coordinated, but they want you in and out. Understood, Aaron said. Any chance of a maintenance bay if we get a fault? He made a face. Depends on what kind. We can do fluids, externals, basic avionics. Anything exotic, we're mailing it with angels. So, no margin. Whatever broke, She'd have to make peace with in-flight. She dropped her gear in the corner of the maintenance tent. A simple cot, a footlocker, the canvas walls flapping in the generator's breath. The maintainers looked up, surprised to see an officer, more surprised to see a woman, then went back to work. No one made a fuss. She liked that. "Ma'am, we run nights," one of them said. "It's loud." "I fly nights," she said. "It's fine." She stepped back outside when she heard the distant thrum of the incoming transport carrying her jet. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, and the sky went from orange to deep purple. The F-117 came off the ramp like something secret that had wandered into the wrong century. Even dusty, even tired, it held presence. She walked to it as the crew guided it in, ran her gloved hand along the edge where faceted panels met. The jet was warm from travel. "We'll get her cooled and plugged," the chief said. "Intel wants to see you after you stow your gear. They said the air picture shifted again." Of course it had. Enemy radars didn't care about her comfort either. Inside Intel, which was just a tent with better locks, a young lieutenant pointed at a tablet. "Ma'am, the mobile radar battalion moved south about 15 kilometers. That's good for your initial ingress. Bad for your egress. They're hunting a hole." "Then we don't give them one," Aaron said. "We shorten our exposure." The lieutenant looked vaguely worried. "That means less fuel margin." "It means we trust the plan," Aaron said. But really, she meant it means I stay near the airplane in case anything pushes our launch. Back at the tent, darkness finally settled. The maintainers kept working, lights on, tools clinking, metal ringing. Aaron lay on the cot, boots still on, listening. This was the real sound of a mission. Not applause, not a general's speech. Generators, wrenches, men swearing softly, aviation fuel. She liked being this close. If somebody found a leak or a panel that wouldn't seal right, she would know now, not at 0300 on the runway. She checked her watch. The run they were planning would give her almost no loiter. Tanker slots were carved thin. If she was late because someone couldn't find her in officer quarters, the whole stack would fray. Here, 20 steps from the Batwing, she could be strapped in before anyone finished saying launch. Outside, the F-117 sat under netting, dark, angular animal waiting to move. In the distance, the desert wind carried the smell of JP-8 and dust. Quiet fortitude didn't always look like flying into Sam's. Sometimes it was just choosing the noisier bed. The ops tent felt smaller tonight. Too many bodies, too many screens, heat from laptops and generators pressing in. Aaron stood with her, arms folded, helmet on the table beside her, while the intel lieutenant from earlier dragged a fresh radar overlay onto the big monitor. Green grids, red circles, and a new shape, a southward bulge. "They shifted again at 1900, he said, trying to sound calm. "The mobile unit's now here, and this sector," he tapped, plastic pen clicking on plastic screen, "overlaps the northern SA-15 umbrella." Marguerite Cole let out a low breath. "That's not a gap, that's a choke." Aaron stepped closer. The image was bad news, yes, but it was also a puzzle. "What's their rotation rate now?" "Faster," the LT said. "Looks like they're on alert footing. 3-hour reposition. They're actively hunting low-signature ingress." Hunting me. She didn't let the thought linger, didn't let it turn into self-pity. Of course they were hunting. Old stealth or new stealth, an airplane still displaced air. Colonel Ramirez appeared from behind the flap, expression already annoyed at the map. "Walk me through it." Cole did. When he finished, Ramirez looked at Aaron, Can you still make your profile? She could say no. She could say, recommend we scrub F-117 and go to a different option. Safe answer, defensible in a post-mission review. It would also hand the doubters exactly what they wanted. She reached for a grease pencil and, without asking, drew a lower line under the red arcs. We go down, she said. Stay under their best look angle. Desert's rough here. Heat scatter will help. It cuts our reaction time, but it gets us past. The LT frowned. Ma'am, that's awfully low for this airframe, she finished. Yeah, I know. I flew the sim. She can do it. Cole cocked his head. You're also burning more fuel on the way in. I saw the tanker plan, Aaron said. We still make it. We don't loiter. Ramirez considered, eyes on the line she'd drawn. ROE hasn't changed, he said. You are not to engage. You're to designate and clear the corridor. I don't need to shoot, Aaron said. I just need them to look somewhere else. That was the heart of it. Not glory, not kills. Distraction. Let the heavy hitters and the vulnerable transport slip through while every radar crew in the sector tried to figure out why a bat-shaped antique was in their face. The LT tried one more time. Ma'am, you'll have almost no margin for error down there. Neither will the C-17 at altitude with a load of people and no stealth, Aaron said. She kept her voice even, not sharp. I'd rather I carry the risk. The tent went quiet for a beat. That was the kind of sentence that moved from pilot preference to commander decision. Ramirez nodded slowly. All right. We adopt Captain Walker's ingress, publish it, push to the B2 cell and to mobility. It clicked into place. Irreversible. Her name now lived in the mission packet. If the ingress worked, it was because she'd been right. If it failed, it was because she'd insisted. As the LT started typing, Aaron felt the old flutter in her chest. Not panic, but the heightened awareness before a night flight. She looked again at the map, imagining the route all the way from engine start to IP. At this altitude, the desert would be a black wall in places. Any sloppy stick work, any moment of distraction, and she'd be a dark smear no one could admit existed. Cole leaned closer so only she could hear. You sure your little museum piece wants to play terrain hugger tonight? She was built to be where people don't look, Aaron said. We're just reminding her. He huffed a tiny laugh. You're a stubborn one, Walker. Stubborn or just tired of the easy outs. Ramirez's voice cut across the room again. Listen up. MCON stays in effect. No active radar, no extra lights. You don't transmit unless you're dying or the mission is. That was a ROE dagger pointed at her. No lighting herself up to make life simpler. If something glitched, she solved it silently. If she got spiked, she ran, not shot. They were trusting stealth to do what it did. She was trusting her hands. As people dispersed, Aaron stayed by the map. She traced the line once more with her eyes, committing every bend. The outside air was cooling, but inside the tent, the generator's breath made her flight suit stick. She thought of the SR-71 file, of her father staying in a radar fan because someone needed the picture. Different altitude, same choice. You accept the sharper edge so the rest of the machine can move. Outside, the forward base returned to its nighttime rhythm. Clanks, shouted numbers, fuel pumps whining. Her jet was 20 steps away, dark under netting, waiting for the plan she'd just made harder. Quiet fortitude, she reminded herself, wasn't silence because you had nothing to say. It was silence after you'd made the hard call, and you stuck with it no matter who was watching. Launch was blacked out. No floodlights, no taxiway glitter, just chemsticks on the ground, hand signals from crew, and her F-117 rolling out of the shelter like a shadow let off its chain. The night over the forward sight was moonless, which was good for stealth and bad for nerves. Aaron strapped in faster than usual, gloves moving on buckles and connectors, helmet sealing with a soft hiss. "Echo 1, ground?" The crew chief's voice came over the line, low, respectful. "You're good to start." "Copy," she said. The jet woke slow, all old bones and old software, but it woke. Outside, generator noise faded as the world narrowed to cockpit glow, red and disciplined. She'd already walked the ingress in her head a dozen times since the ops tent. This would be about timing. She didn't have extra. "Tower, Echo 1, taxi." "Echo 1, cleared. Good hunting." She taxied out, black on black, wheels humming over rougher pavement than Tonopah. The desert night smelled of fuel and dust. When she lined up, she didn't wait. She pushed, felt the engine surge, and the Nighthawk lunged forward, shoulders of darkness slipping past. Rotation. Gear up. She climbed to the first gate, then nosed down toward the low entry she herself had pushed for. MCON in effect. No chatter. The desert at that altitude was a jagged mouth ready to take her if she got lazy. NVGs turned ridges into green teeth. She trimmed, settled, let her breathing go slow. This was the part she liked, the privacy of flight. No eyes on her, just her and the machine. Then the threat receiver blinked alive with a new tone. Not the ground radars she'd been studying. Different rhythm. Different place in the sky. Her heart thudded once. Airborne early warning. Enemy had put an eye in the air. That hadn't been on the last update. She checked the scope again, kept her hands steady. The AEW's look angle wasn't aimed dead at her, but its orbit was wide enough that in 7-8 minutes, it would be looking right over the slice of desert she was about to cross. B-2 would be behind. C-17 later. If she stuck to the minute they'd planned, she'd run right through a fresher, higher set of ears than the ground nets. She could call it in. Except ROE said MCON. Except any unexpected transmission from her altitude in this part of the map, right now, was a flare in the enemy's dark. She swallowed dry and did the math. If she shaved 20 seconds here and then dragged feet behind the ridge, she could let the AEW swing past, then pop back on timing before IP. It would mean burning a bit more fuel and asking the B-2 cell to breathe an extra lungful in holding. But they were higher, safer. She was the one in the knife's path. She eased off power, letting the Nighthawk sink a hair lower, riding the desert's contour. Outside, the world was now pure tunnel, ridge to starless sky to ridge again. Her RWR stopped escalating, stayed in the "I see you but I don't like you yet" zone. In her headset, secure, Maggie. Cole's voice cracked in. Distant, relayed. Echo, status. She could have said it. Unexpected AEW, adjusting profile. Instead, she pressed the transmit key once. A click. The agreed, "I'm fine, no talk." ROE satisfied. Enemy not alerted. Leadership in silence. She pictured the B-2 crew, masked, watching their own instruments, wondering why their timestamps were drifting. They'd ask later. She'd have an answer. Right now, the job was to get to IP with the least amount of attention. The AEW's arc slid past on her screen like a hunting bird that hadn't smelled her. She took back the 20 seconds with a smooth push of throttle, angling toward the ingress point. The desert opened a fraction, enough to let her breathe. Deep inside her chest, the old voice started. What if you misread? What if the AEW was nothing? What if this was your chance to show you can follow exactly, finally? She killed it. She hadn't come this far to be the obedient, silent woman pilot who never deviated. Quiet fortitude wasn't submission. It was choosing the harder, lonelier option because it made the mission live. Ahead, at the edge of her scope, ground threats brightened. The radars they knew about, the ones she'd drawn lines around. She was on time again. The B-2 package behind her would never know they'd almost walked into a bigger ear. She dipped even lower to set up for the hold she'd have to take in the next phase, the one that would burn her reserve. The jet shivered in the dirty air near the ground, but it held. She let her hand rest on the throttle, fingers loose. Echo 1. You're good on track, Cole's voice came back, this time without the question. Continue. She didn't answer. MCON. She let the silence stand like a statement. From here on, there was no going back. She had adjusted everyone's timing to fit the real sky, not the ideal one from the tent. If anything broke now, her name would be the first one in the debrief hot seat. She accepted it. Like her father in the black and white report. Saw the picture was dirty, stayed to clean it. The desert rolled beneath her, endless and sharp. The enemy was awake. So was she. The target sector rose ahead of her like a darker patch inside the dark. Not something she could see with her eyes, but a shape built from coordinates and briefings and every satellite picture she'd memorized. Erin eased the F-117 behind a low ridge line and let the jet ride the terrain, nose pointed toward the point where she'd pop up, just long enough to paint the node. RWR murmured with ground search radars, regular, sweeping. They weren't on her yet. Good. She checked fuel, not bad, not generous either, not after the adjustment for the enemy AEW. She'd eaten into what had looked comfortable on paper. A coded burst came over the net. B-2 element delayed. Not much. Just long enough to matter when you were in a black jet inside someone else's air defense bubble. Erin closed her eyes for half a second, letting the irritation burn out before it turned her hands jerky. Bombers were higher, slower to adjust, more to coordinate. She knew that. But down here, seconds didn't feel like abstractions on a slider. They felt like hot breath on the back of your neck. She keyed once, acknowledgement, then went back to flying. The ridgeline gave her cover from the worst angles. If the enemy's mobile radar tried to get clever and swing, it would have to deal with terrain. That's why she'd proposed this route. Use the desert. Make their shiny systems stare into rock. Stay with it, Echo. Cole's voice came through, closer, now, riding a relay. They're only pushing a short delay. Row E still in her head. No collateral. The B-2 could not just drop somewhere near. She had to designate the exact node. Power, comm, not housing, not civilian spill. This wasn't a dumb bomb in the middle of nowhere. This was surgery with people watching from DC. She watched the fuel numbers tick. If she left now, nobody could fault her. The debrief would read, fuel below desired, enemy air present, pilot elected to egress. Sensible. Safe. It would also mean the mission died right here, in this yawning stretch of black. Negative, she murmured to herself, not keying the mic. She nudged the throttle forward, just a hair, to keep her nose in the right window, to keep from drifting where a radar might see her. Every extra second at this power setting was her reserve bleeding away. Outside, the night was still. No moon, just a smear of stars. The jet's engine vibration ran up through the seat into her spine, a steady animal heartbeat. Her father would have stayed, not because he was reckless, because the picture on the ground needed finishing. She anchored that thought and let it settle her. Another sweep brushed the ridge, higher intensity this time. Enemy was restless. Maybe they'd seen a ghost flicker on some degraded screen when she'd adjusted for the AEW. Maybe they just didn't like how quiet this sector was. Aaron kept the jet tucked in. Flying low wasn't just about stick and throttle. It was about patience. About holding your nerve while the clock worked against you. B2 element to designator, came the finally arrived voice, distorted through layers of secure relay. We are 2 mics out of release envelope. 2 minutes. Felt like an hour. Designator copies, she said, because now it was worth breaking silence. Standing by. She rolled a degree out from cover, just enough to start the setup for her pop and mark. RWR spiked for a heartbeat. One of the ground radars got a sniff, then dropped as she fell back into the notch. Timing, angles, fuel ticked down again. She did a fast mental model of her egress. It was going to be tighter now. Less room for detours. If the enemy woke up after the strike, she'd be outrunning them on a thinner tank. Fine. That was her choice. Better her than the C-17 with souls on board. Designator, confirm target package is power comm node northwest of compound, the B2 voice said. Procedural, professional. Affirm, Aaron said. PID required. Collateral not authorized. Copy. There was comfort in hearing another crew out there. Invisible, but real. They were trusting a single, supposedly obsolete jet, flown by a supposedly reassigned female pilot, to make their multi-million-dollar weapons legal. Coming up on mark, Aaron said. She eased the F-117 out of the hide, nose lifting. For a moment, she was where radar could skim her. Heartbeat pounded in her ears. She brought the designator online, the system whining softly. There, the target area resolved on her display, the node exactly where Intel said it would be. She put the cross where it needed to go. Target lays on, she said. The B-2 took it. In that second, with the laser riding the desert air, everything else, the doubt in the briefing, the ops major's sneer, the AEW curveball, fell away. It was just mission. Then she was diving back into cover, shutting down anything that didn't need to glow. The ridge swallowed her again. RWR lit briefly as the enemy realized something had happened. Energy changed, comms flared, but she was already back in her pocket. Fuel, worse now, manageable, barely. She exhaled. Not relief, reset. Designator good laissez, the B-2 voice said. Package away. Copy, egressing. Not quite, she thought, not yet. There was still another bird coming through this corridor, and she was going to have to make the enemy stare at her a little longer. Quiet fortitude meant you didn't leave early just because you could. The strike was done, but the desert didn't calm. If anything, the electronic air got noisier. Aaron watched the RWR bloom with chatter, searching, correlating, the enemy's systems trying to understand why, in the middle of a quiet night, one of their nodes had just died with surgical precision. She was back in her notch, F-117 low and breathing hard, fuel lower than she liked. The ridge to her right was her friend. The flat to her left was death if she climbed. Above, somewhere still distant, the B-2 was already turning cold and long, vanishing into the sky like the ghost it was. Her headset crackled with a new voice, stressed but controlled. Mobility. Designator element, this is reach package. We are 5 mics from corridor. Request confirmation sector is clear. 5 minutes. A fat, slow C-17 with people on board, coming through air that was now alert and angry. Aaron swallowed, felt how dry her mouth had gotten. Stand by, Reach. She shifted her attention back to the threat picture, One emitter in particular pulsed higher. That was not search. That was a SAM battery waking all the way up, spinning to full attention. Its position on the overlay put it just far enough to have an obnoxious look at the corridor the C-17 would use. If it got a hint of a big transport, she didn't want to finish that sentence. Echo. Cole's voice came in, tight. I've got that SAM too. You're not required to stay. Maybe not required, but the C-17 sure as hell was. Reach package, Aaron said, keeping her tone level. Air defenses are active in your sector. Hold for my call. Roger, holding, the mobility pilot said. There was trust there. A big airplane trusting a single stealth jet from a bygone era, flown by a captain who shouldn't even have been on some people's rosters. She looked at the map again, at the SAM. ROE allowed deception. They hadn't wanted her to fire unless fired upon. Fine. She didn't have to shoot to get attention. She just had to make the enemy think their night wasn't over. She knew a patch of ground just off the real corridor. Heat signatures, old equipment, something that on radar would look like it mattered. Intel had briefed it as non-collateral, non-critical. A good place to point a finger. Cole, she said quietly, I'm going to give them something else to look at. Walker, you start throwing light around, and they're going to want to know who you are. They were going to look anyway, she said. Better they look at me than at Reach. That was the turn. She eased the jet out from the ridge, not fully exposing, just enough to get the line of sight she needed. The RWR whined higher. The SAM crew saw the movement. Good, look at me. She brought the designator up again, fingers quick on the controls. This wasn't the same careful, no collateral lazy she'd given the B-2. This was a flash of, hey, over here, in the electromagnetic night. She painted the decoy point. On the enemy's end, some operator would see a return in a place that didn't match what just got hit. They would pivot. Humans were curious, especially when startled. The RWR jumped. The SAM was fully tracking now. There you go, Aaron murmured. Take the bait. Echo, you are being painted, Cole said, very calm. Recommend egress. Negative. Reach, corridor is opening. Move now. Copy, moving, the C-17 pilot said. And she could hear engines spooling even through radio compression. Could hear the hurry. Aaron kept the laissez on the decoy a beat longer than was comfortable, giving the SAM's processors something to chew. In that second, she was naked, low, older stealth profile, no mountains between her and a launcher that was suddenly very interested. Then she killed it and dove back toward the ridge, trying to reweave herself into the desert. Too late, one of the radars held her. Not a full fire control lock yet, but close. She pictured a crew chief on the enemy side barking, men running, consoles glowing. Echo, you're tracked, Cole said. Say fuel. She glanced. Low, but workable. Workable is doing a lot of work there. I know. She banked to keep the tracking radar on a less favorable aspect of her jet, presenting that angle the airframe liked best. The F-117 shivered but obeyed. For a moment she saw, in her mind, not on her display, the C-17's hulking shape slipping right through the slice of sky she'd just made turbulent. They wouldn't even know. To them, it would be a quiet corridor on a dark night. That was the whole point. Reach. Status? She asked. Through initial, continuing, came the answer, breathless, grateful, professional. Appreciate the coverage. She didn't say you're welcome. Didn't say remember my name. None of that mattered. She cut back toward her egress line, RWR still lit like a Christmas tree. What mattered was that they were through and the SAM was staring at the wrong thing. She felt the tightness in her chest shift into something fiercer, sharper. This was what she was for. Not the parades, not the recruitment posters. The invisible, risky 5 minutes that let someone else go home. The radar tone crept higher. "Okay," she whispered to the jet. "Now we run." The first warning tone had been a needle. Now it was a chorus. Erin's RWR lit in stacked sectors. One, then two, then a third radar waking up farther east, all of them trying to solve the same black shape that had just flashed a laser where no laser should be. The F-117 cockpit, usually calm and red, felt suddenly tight, like someone had put a hand on her helmet and pressed. "Echo, you're lit up across the board," Cole said, voice clipped. "Recommend you—" He didn't finish, because there weren't a lot of good recommendations. She pushed the jet lower, riding the desert's uneven back. For 2-3 seconds it helped. One radar cone lost her behind a rise, but the other found her again, angrier. They were triangulating. Too many eyes. Okay. Terrain alone won't save us. She checked fuel. Ugly. The extra burn to stay for B2, then to pull eyes off the C-17, had eaten the cushion. She had enough to make it out if she didn't spend too long dodging. Another tone, higher, more focused. Fire control. "Echo," Cole said, too calm now, the way controllers got when the variables shrank. "You are in a hostile engagement envelope. ROE, self-defense only." She had no intention of shooting. A single missile launch would light the sky. Better to make them miss. "Copy," she said, executing evasive. The F-117 wasn't built to dogfight. It was built to not be seen. But not seen was a probability game, and probabilities could turn on you. The trick when they did was to act in a way the enemy's model didn't expect. She yanked the nose up into a climbing turn that no one flew in this jet unless they had to. The frame shuddered, complaining. G pressed her into the seat, harness biting her shoulders. She rolled at the top to change aspect, to show the radars a different face, the faceted one that bent their pulses away. For a split second, the tone dropped, lock broken. Then another radar picked her up. "Come on," she muttered, "not at the jet, not at the enemy, at the whole situation, at being the only thing left to swat at in a night they didn't understand." She pushed power, traded fuel for speed, dove back toward a different slice of terrain than the one she'd been using. Non-standard, non-predictable. If the enemy operators had already started plotting her course, she wanted their grease pencil line to be wrong. The desert rushed up at her, dark and grainy through NVGs. Heat shimmered even at night. She leveled just above it, fingers light, breath controlled. Her heartbeat wanted to sprint. She forced it to match the engine's vibration. "Reach is clear of corridor," came the mobility pilot's voice, blessed, ignorant. "Appreciate the assist." Good. That was the reason this whole mess had started. Now she had to survive her own distraction. One of the radars tried to re-establish. She could tell by the way the tone warbled, hungry. She rolled again, shallow, moved laterally toward a low escarpment she'd memorized from the map hours earlier. It wasn't much, but it gave her a horizontal mask from one of the emitters. "Echo, you still with me?" Cole asked. "Still with you?" "You're off planned egress." "Survival route," she said. "We'll rejoin." She knew what that meant for the debrief. Someone would draw 2 lines. The one she was supposed to take, and the one she actually took. They would ask why. She would have an answer, because 3 radars don't care about your planned egress. The RWR finally began to thin. Not gone, never gone, But the bloom eased as her non-standard profile stretched their math. One radar dropped entirely. Maybe terrain, maybe operator fatigue. Two remained, sniffing. Fuel ticked again. The number made her jaw clench. She couldn't keep doing violent moves, not and make it home. So she shifted gears, from hard evasive to stealth discipline. Back to the thing the F-117 did best. She smoothed her path, picked the darker, cooler line between ridges, and bled just enough speed to stop glowing on someone's kinematic prediction. The tones stayed, lower now, like distant dogs instead of wolves. "Echo," Cole said, a hint of relief creeping in. "Picture is getting better. You good to continue egress?" "Affirm," she said. Inside, the adrenaline still burned. Not the wild kind, the cold, thin kind that made sounds sharper. She was acutely aware of how alone she was out here. The B-2 was gone. The C-17 was gone. The enemy was still awake solely because of her. This was the part no one at home would ever see, not even in a classified award write-up. Pilot performed evasive maneuvers. They would never smell the hot electronics, hear the layered warning tones, feel the way the jet's age whispered in every shudder. She let herself think, just for a breath, of her father in the SR-71, sky above, missiles below. No one to help, just procedure and nerve. He hadn't had a crowd either. Quiet fortitude, she reminded herself, is staying calm when the sky thinks it has you. She pointed the nose toward the line that would take her out of the worst of the defenses. Fuel was still a problem, but at least for the moment, she wasn't a glowing target in the middle of a radar bloom. For a minute, it looked like she'd actually shaken them. The tones had eased. Her egress vector was set, and the desert ahead was a darker promise of airspace that belonged more to her than to them. Fuel was thin but not suicidal. Erin let her grip loosen on the stick, just a fraction, as the F-117 settled into the line that would take her home. Then the high-side voice cut in. Cooler, farther away, the kind of voice that wasn't in the tent with her, wasn't sweating over generators and dust. "Echo 1, this is Overwatch. Air picture degraded. All strike-related assets are to RTB immediately. Say state." She could almost see them. Some colonel in an air-conditioned control center, watching a big, messy radar picture with too many unknowns, making the safest possible call. She checked fuel because they'd asked. "Overwatch, Echo 1, fuel low but RTB capable. Echo 1, acknowledge RTB at this time." There it was, the out, the good girl exit. "Go home, Walker. You did enough. Let the rest sort itself out." Except the rest wasn't sorted. Her RWR still showed intermittent search in the direction the C-17 had gone. Not a lock, not yet, but a curious sweep, the kind that said, "We know something big just passed through and we'd love to see it again." The mobility crew had sounded clear, but big transports stayed on people's scopes longer than sleek stealth jets. If those radars got a second look, or if a tanker supporting them drifted into view, she pictured the C-17 pilot, voice grateful, pushing power but heavy. She pictured how close the enemy's ready batteries still were. "Echo 1, confirm RTB," Overwatch repeated, more insistent. Down in the forward ops, Cole came on, lower, almost under his breath. "Walker, you heard them." She did, and she'd obeyed 1,000 times in 1,000 flights. But none of those times had she been the only one in the right spot to keep the enemy's eyes busy. She took a breath and tasted rubber, sweat, avionics heat. The jet felt old again. Not bad old, just honest old, like it was asking her quietly, "Are we really doing one more?" "Overwatch," Erin said, voice level. Echo 1 is executing short extension to ensure egress corridors cold. Will RTB thereafter. There was a beat of radio silence, the kind where you could hear people on the other end looking at each other. Echo 1, negative, RTB now, threat is unpredictable. She could have said threat is unpredictable for the C-17 too. She didn't. No point picking a fight on open air. Instead, she eased the jet just slightly off her egress to keep a better line of sight on the sector the enemy was sniffing. This was the turn. Once she deviated, it was going in the tape. Someone would pull the audio. Someone would ask why she'd ignored a direct RTB. She would have to argue from results. "Cole," she said on the internet, "how far clear is reach?" "Almost out," he said, "but not out enough for me to sleep." "Copy. I'll make sure they don't get a second look." He didn't tell her no. Maybe because he was the one who'd watched her stay through sims and glitches. Maybe because he knew what her father had done without ever saying his name. Or maybe because at the edge of the map, someone had to be imperfectly obedient. She rolled the F-117 to present her tougher aspect again, giving any lingering radar the same odd shape to chew on. She didn't flash the designator this time. Once was enough. She just stayed visible enough, in just the right angle, to remain the most interesting question on their screens. Her fuel ticked lower. That was the price. Every extra loop of the radar's curiosity cost her minutes she could have spent direct heading home. "Echo 1, Overwatch said, frostier now. "You are outside ordered profile." "Overwatch, Echo 1, she said. "Corridors clearing. I will RTB." You could tell a lot about a pilot from how they used the future tense. I will. Not I refuse. Not I'm ignoring. She was telling them, this is temporary disobedience in favor of the mission we all wanted. The RWR finally began to quiet in the direction the transport had gone. The enemy, having failed to see anything else juicy, went back to grumbling about the odd stealth flicker that had disappeared behind terrain. Only then did she turn the jet fully toward home. Her shoulders ached. The inside of the mask was damp. She felt a wave of something like anger, not at Overwatch, but at the whole layered system that could order her away from the very thing she'd bled fuel to protect. This was why so many of the best missions never made it to public affairs. Not because anyone was hiding glory, but because the most important decisions looked bad on paper. Quiet fortitude, she reminded herself, is trusting that the people worth impressing will understand. "Echo 1 now RTB, she said, finally giving them the line they wanted. "Copy," Overwatch said, cool again. "Proceed." She pointed the nose toward the dark where friendly air waited, carrying a jet that was older than most of the people telling her what to do, and a decision that would be argued in a windowless room. The cockpit was a furnace of red light and warning tones. She'd thought it before, but now, back in this exact second she'd been flying toward all night, it was truer. The RWR was full, sectors stacked, and the F-117 felt smaller around her, like the enemy's attention was physically pushing in on the canopy. Below, somewhere in the dark, the C-17 was making its last, widest turn to get clear. "Echo, you're spiking 3 radars," Maja Cole snapped. "You're naked out there." "C-17 stays clean," Aaron said, jaw hard. "They look at me." Saying it out loud locked it in. That was the move. No more polite evasive, no more half-hiding behind ridges. If the enemy still had missiles they wanted to throw, better they waste them on her weird, old Batwing than on a full transport. She rolled the jet a degree, just like before, presenting the angular face that confused some waveforms and intrigued others. The airframe shivered in the dirty air above the desert. Old jet, old shaping, new enemy software. The higher voice, Overwatch, tried to come back. Echo 1, you have already... She killed the transmit. Not now. Alarms climbed a half step. One of the radars went from interested to convinced. A launch tone knifed through the cockpit, sharp, insistent. There it was. Somebody had stopped studying and had finally fired. Procedure flooded in. Counter-maneuver profiles, timing, angle changes. She didn't pray. She didn't make promises. She just flew. She shoved the nose down, then snapped into a climbing brake that made the F-117 groan, purposefully wrong-footing whatever solution the missile's brain had started building. The G hit fast and ugly, pressing her shoulders, making her teeth clack. She rolled out offset, then pushed again, claws of black desert reaching up. Outside, she couldn't see the missile. This wasn't a movie with contrails and fiery streaks. This was instruments and tones and trust. The RWR told the story. Weapon inbound, then confused, then trying again. Come on, she breathed. She pictured the enemy operators angry, embarrassed from the clean strike earlier, suddenly delighted to have something real in scope. Their night had just turned interesting. She had given them that. Echo, burn it north, Cole said. Make them turn. She didn't. North would put her farther from the C-17's shadow. Instead, she kept to the line that left the transport the safest cone. Let them turn for me. The missile's tone wavered. Her last maneuver had bought a sliver. She used it to climb just enough to get out of a ground clutter zone, then dipped again so the missile had to reacquire. Every one of those moves cost energy. Every one of them was dragging her closer to the fuel line she didn't want to cross. A second launch tone flickered, lower probability, multiple shots or a second system joining late. Good. More eyes on her, fewer on the corridor. Echo 1, this is Reach, the transport pilot said, breathless. We are feet wet equivalent. We're clear. Relief didn't come. There wasn't time for it. Even if they were clear, she wasn't yet. The enemy didn't know to stand down at transport away. They were still chasing the ghost. She gave them a ghost. At the edge of the envelope, she flew a profile no one would have trained. A short, violent lateral kick right after a nose dip. Something that briefly put her in a less stealth-favorable angle, but made the missile overshoot the predicted interception point. The F-117 complained. Airflow burbled, a panel somewhere rattled, but it stayed with her. The missile tone flared, then dropped, confused. Heat washed through the cockpit from the effort. Sweat ran down her spine under the flight suit. The mask smelled of rubber and her own breath. Break out, Echo, a calmer controller said. Maybe Ramirez relayed, maybe someone else. Mission complete. Not yet. She flattened, putting the jet into a lower, faster run to get out of the densest radar spikes. In the glass ahead, the desert was only absence, a black sea with no horizon. For a surreal second, she imagined the F-117 from the outside, a dark arrow, old angles, still winning space in a battlefield that thought it had outgrown her. If somebody had to be the ghost everyone forgot, it would be her. The tones finally began to drop in pitch, the way they did when the systems behind them started to lose interest or geometry. She kept up her speed, didn't let herself sag. Only when she was sure the missiles had either spent or lost did she let the jet breathe. Echo, say status, Cole said, back to business. She scanned, some parameters hot, one system not happy from the maneuver, flyable. Echo is damaged but airborne, she said. RTB. No one cheered. No one said, you saved them. That wasn't how these nights went. On the tape, it would look messy. Disobedience, exposure, fuel miserliness ignored. On the ground, in a room without windows, they dissect it. Up here, alone, it was very simple. She'd made every radar stare at her until the slowest American airplane in the AO was gone. Quiet fortitude, done loud in the electromagnetic, silent everywhere else. The silence after the warning chorus was almost worse. Erin could still feel the echoes of the tones in her jaw, in the back of her neck, but the cockpit itself had gone back to that low, wounded hum. Systems hot, airframe tired. The F-117 flew, but it flew like a runner after the sprint. Capable, not happy. She checked the panel. One of the environmental control subsystems was yellow, edging toward red. Another showed a transient fault, probably from the violent lateral kick she'd done to spoof the missile. Nothing was bleeding out fast, but this wasn't a jet she could just cruise home with all the lights on. Echo, telemetry shows you took a hit to something, Cole said, voice softer than before. Say capacity. Still flying, she said. Recommend recovery per Black protocol. A small pause, then, copy, Black recovery approved. Black recovery meant fly minimized, talk only when you must, get the aircraft and its secrets back before anything else. It was the spiritual twin of the way she'd been flying the whole night, unseen, uncelebrated. She started shutting things off, non-essential lighting, a secondary cooling loop, anything that was pulling power from the parts that mattered. The cockpit grew even more Spartan, even more red and shadow. Outside, the night was an unbroken sheet. Fuel was ugly, not catastrophic, but she'd have to make the first recovery opportunity stick. No waves, no go-arounds. Put it down. Overwatch to Echo 1, came the high, controlled voice again. We show you RTB. Be advised recovery field is code 2 for Black assets. Vector follows. They dumped headings at her. She wrote them on her kneeboard even though her brain was catching them fine. Habit, discipline. If something else failed, she wanted the ink. The desert slid beneath. As she left the densest threat zones, the RWR calmed to an almost peaceful background purr. She let herself exhale slowly. The worst violence was behind her. What was left was the quiet grind of getting home in a jet that had done more tonight than anyone had promised it would. Her father had once said, she remembered it on a kitchen morning, his voice low so he wouldn't wake her mother. The hard part isn't the run. It's getting back without bragging about it. She hadn't understood then. Now she did. Echo, say runway in sight, the recovery controller said, more local now, more present. Negative visual, she said. Still a ways. Copy. Be advised you are number 1, no pattern traffic. Of course. Nobody else was flying a black triangle into this strip tonight. She ran the landing checklist half from muscle, half from memory, compensating for the subsystem that was yellow. Flaps. Gear. The jet responded, a touch slow but obedient. She could smell hot electronics, not burning, just overworked. Like the jet was telling her, I did it. Now let me sleep. The runway lights appeared first as a faint string in the dark, then brighter. Relief washed through her muscles, and she pushed it away. Landing wasn't done. Landings killed pilots who relaxed too early. Tower, Echo 1, on final, emergency profile. Echo 1, cleared to land. Winds calm. She brought the nose in, careful, compensating for whatever slight drag her battered systems were adding. The F-117 didn't float like a trainer. It came down with purpose. Tonight, with her fuel low and systems hot, it felt even more sinky. She flared just enough. Touchdown was hard. Not a crash, not even unsafe. Just a firm, this night is over arrival. Tires barked. The jet shuddered. She rode the rudders, kept it centered, let the speed bleed. When they slowed to taxi pace, she finally let herself breathe. Echo 1, roll to black hangar. Maintenance is standing by. Copy, she said, voice hoarse. As she taxied, she glanced at the panel again. The yellow had steadied. Nothing had cascaded into red. The old Batwing had taken hostile radars, violent maneuvers, and a full night's work, and had still brought her home. In front of the darkened hangar, figures waited. Maintenance in coveralls, a couple of officers, Colonel Ramirez with hands behind his back. No cameras, no media, just the people who actually knew what had just happened in the sky. She shut down. The cockpit cooled in stages, fans spinning down, lights winking off. She sat for a second, visor up, listening to the tick of metal. Her hands were shaking now that no one could see. She climbed down the ladder. Desert air hit her, dusty and colder than it had been at sunset. Ramirez stepped forward, eyes scanning the jet's skin first, then her. You brought her back, he said. She brought me back, Aaron said. He nodded once, acknowledgement, not praise. This would all go into a classified file. The world would go on thinking the A-10 was the start and end of Air Force legend. But tonight, an outdated jet flown by a woman they hadn't believed had written a new line. Medical's inside, Ramirez said. Then debrief. Of course. Debrief, explanation, justification. She looked back at the F-117 under the floodless light. It looked tired. So, was she? The debrief room had no windows and the worst kind of fluorescent light. The buzzing, slightly green kind that made everyone look tired and guilty. Aaron sat at the end of the table, flight suit half unzipped, undershirt damp, hair still matted from the helmet. Her logbook sat closed in front of her like a shield she wasn't allowed to raise yet. Across from her, an intel captain with neat notes, a JAG major with a laptop open, and Colin Ramirez at the head. Majin, Cole leaned on the wall, arms crossed, eyes on her rather than the paperwork. The JAG started. They always did. Captain Walker, he said, voice neutral. We've reviewed preliminary tapes from Overwatch. You were issued an RTB order at time 002-113 local. You acknowledged fuel state was low but capable. You did not immediately comply. Aaron kept her gaze on him. Correct. Can you explain, he said, fingers poised over keys, your rationale for delaying compliance? She could feel the fatigue trying to drag her answers long. She cut it short. Economy of language. Enemy air defense was still probing the egress corridor for the C-17, she said. I was the only platform positioned to draw attention away. I extended to ensure egress was cold. The intel captain looked up. You illuminated a decoy point prior to that. Yes. That increased your signature. Yes, she said again. By design. The SAM was looking at the corridor the C-17 needed. I offered it an alternative. The JAG tapped. You were aware of ROE restrictions. No kinetic unless fired upon, minimal emissions. I complied, Aaron said, pulse steady. I didn't fire. My emissions were limited and purposeful. The captain frowned. Purposeful, maybe, but risky. Ramirez finally spoke. Risky is not automatically non-compliant, Captain. Continue. That bought Aaron a breath. She let the room smell settle. AC, dry paper, faint JP-8 from her suit. She heard the generators outside and the distant clang of maintenance. The real base, the people who'd seen her jet land hot, existed just beyond these walls. The intel captain pulled up a feed on his tablet. These are the radar logs we got from our side, he said, turning it so they all saw the spiking picture. You can see the point at which enemy systems began multiple track behavior. That correlates to your laissez on the decoy. It also correlates, Aaron said, to the moment the C-17 was inbound. I needed their eyes. JAG Major. Needed. That's judgment. Overwatch made a different judgment. From a different altitude, Aaron said before she could stop herself. The room paused. Cole's mouth twitched. Ramirez's eyes narrowed in warning, but not anger. Aaron inhaled, reset. Sir, ma'am, I'm not disputing command authority. I'm saying the tactical picture from my position showed a higher risk to mobility than to me. I chose to absorb that risk. That put it in the language they liked. Risk absorption, tactical necessity, not stubborn captain ignoring orders. Ramirez leaned forward, elbows on the table. For the record, he said, looking straight at the JAG, the extension was in support of an active exfil asset. That asset reports clean egress. The extension prevented potential hostile acquisition. I consider the deviation tactically justified. He said it flat. Commander to paperwork. That was the turn. With that sentence, he moved her off the reckless pilot track and onto the commander-endorsed judgment call track. The JAG hesitated, then typed. Very well. We will note commander-endorsed. However, Captain Walker, you should be aware that future deviations may not be viewed as favorably. Yes, sir, she said. She would do it again anyway. The intel captain relaxed a fraction. For what it's worth, he said, tone almost human now. The C-17 crew is convinced someone took heat for them. They don't need to know who, Aaron said. Ramirez nodded, satisfied. They won't. This entire mission set is staying compartmentalized. No external statements, no PAO engagement. You'll get a memo in your file. A memo, not a medal ceremony, not even a handshake in front of the squadron. A piece of language in a folder that would live in a safe. Cole finally spoke from the wall. Memo from a black mission means more than most pieces of ribbon, Walker. I know, she said. And she did. But she also knew no one outside this room, outside this hangar, would ever tell a little girl that a woman once flew an obsolete stealth jet into a modern air defense hell to keep a transport alive. The JAG closed his laptop. No further questions. The intel captain gathered his notes. We'll update the threat model with your non-standard profile, he said. It worked. It worked because she flew it, Cole muttered. Ramirez stood. The others took that as dismissal and filed out, door shutting with a soft seal. When it was just the three of them, Ramirez, Cole, Aaron, the colonel let his shoulders drop. You kept a lot of people alive tonight, he said. Aaron met his eyes. So did the jet. He smiled, faint. Jet didn't decide to stay after RTB, you did. She didn't answer. Praise felt out of place in this room, under this buzzing light. Ramirez nodded toward the door. Get cleaned up, sleep. We'll talk about follow-on tasking tomorrow. Follow-on, so she wasn't being benched. The program wasn't using this as an excuse to box the F-117 back up. Good. As she stepped out into the cooler, darker corridor, the generator hum washed over her again. The base at night felt more honest than the debrief room. Out here, people saw the scorched panels on her jet and knew something hard had happened. Inside a safe, there would be a memo. That would have to be enough. The base was different after 0300. Generators still rumbled, a distant forklift still clanked, but most of the voices had gone. The maintainers were down to a skeleton crew, heads bent over checklists, flashlights playing over the F-117's dark skin. They spoke low, the way people do around the wounded. Aaron sat alone at a metal desk inside a small office off the hangar, a space that had probably been meant for tools or spare parts. Someone had left a lamp there, the yellow kind that made the room feel less like a container and more like a place. Her flight suit was fresh. She'd showered, washed the desert and sweat out of her hair. Exhaustion tugged at her eyes, but her hands were steady now. She pulled a thin, nondescript notebook from her bag. Not government issue. Not something anyone had asked her to keep. Just a plain, bought-in-town notebook with a black cover. On the first blank page, she wrote the date, location, and a line of numbers that meant the mission to her and would mean nothing to someone else. She hesitated, pen tip hovering. Classified missions had official debriefs. Those lived on secure drives, behind firewalls, in vaults. She'd just come from one. But official debriefs weren't stories. They were bones stripped of muscle. Time on target, emissions, deviations, fuel state. None of them said, "This was the night a supposedly outdated jet outflew modern air defenses, so a heavy bird could go home." None of them said, "This was the night I understood my father." She began to write. Not a report, a letter to no one. She wrote in clean, tight lines about the AEW showing up where it hadn't been, about dropping lower because she'd trusted her red of the sky, about burning reserve to stay for the B-2, about the decoy lulls, about the missile tone that wouldn't quit. She wrote C-17 stays clean. They look at me. She underlined it once. She added one more line. Dad stayed too. The words sat there, small but solid. She pictured the old SR-71 debrief she'd seen. So dry, so thin. She wondered if he'd gone home after a mission like that and written anything down. He probably hadn't. Different era, different expectations. Maybe he'd just carried it inside until it became part of the way he walked. She didn't want this to just be weight. She wanted it to be a thread. So she added SR-71, F-117, B-2, C-17 and drew arrows between them, a tiny chain of unseen things. At the top, she wrote quietly, legend. Not for the world. For her. An aviation history that never made documentaries, but still won nights. Outside the office door, she heard footsteps. She closed the notebook, not out of shame, but because it was hers. Cole stepped in, knocking on the frame. "You're still up," he said. "You're still working," she said, nodding toward the hangar. He shrugged. "Your bird took a beating. They want to love on it before sunup." His eyes flicked to the notebook. "Log?" Something like that. He didn't pry. Instead, he leaned against the door. "In case nobody says it in the open, what you did up there, that doesn't happen a lot. People staying after RTB, putting an old stealth in front of new missiles, that's rare." She met his gaze. "And no one will know." He considered. "The ones who need to will. The C-17 crew will get the sanitized version. You had coverage. Intel will update their models and pretend it was always possible. We'll log it. Ramirez will make sure your file isn't sunk." "It's not the same." "No," Cole said. "It's not." They let the silence sit. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that said they'd both spent parts of their careers doing things that only lived in rooms like this. "You going to keep flying her?" he asked. "Assuming we can patch her?" Aaron looked past him, through the office window, at the F-117 under the lights, panel open. Tex talking softly. It looked like a relic someone refused to put back in the museum. "Yeah," she said. "As long as they let me." He nodded, satisfied, and left her to the lamp and the notebook. She opened it again. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "No one believed her outdated jet could," and paused. The rest didn't need to be finished on paper. She knew how the sentence ended. So did everyone who would ever stumble across this notebook if it outlived her. She closed the cover. Outside, the night was already sliding toward the pale side of dawn. In a few hours, this base would roar awake, people pretending it had been a normal night. Erin stood, stretched, and slipped the notebook into the bottom of her bag, under spare flight gloves and a folded patch. No parade. No headline. Just a woman pilot walking back out to the hangar to check on the jet she'd taken into a modern war and brought home. That was enough. What you just read isn't a story about a miracle jet. It's a story about a person doing the right thing when nobody is watching, and about how entire missions, entire lives, sometimes depend on someone who is willing to be invisible. Erin is fictional, but the pattern isn't. Real aviators, crew chiefs, loadmasters, intel officers have done versions of this in the dark for decades, and most of it will never make it past the classified stamp. That's the uncomfortable truth. History is often written by the loudest moments, but it's actually held together by the quiet ones. If you felt something in the way she stayed on station with low fuel, or in how she accepted a memo instead of a medal, that feeling is the point. It's a reminder that competence, restraint, and integrity are just as cinematic as explosions. They're just harder to film. And it's a reminder that women in uniform don't have to be exceptional for a woman. They can simply be exceptional, full stop, carrying legacies that were never meant to have their names on them. So here's the value I want you to take with you. Behind every headline aircraft, A-10, F-22, B-2, there are forgotten platforms and even more forgotten people making the headline possible. When we tell these unsung stories, we widen the lens. We give credit to the systems thinkers, the disciplined flyers, the crews who sleep next to the jet so it'll launch on time. We make space for a different kind of heroism, the kind that doesn't need applause to be valid. If you want more stories like this, military, psychological, character first, told from the cockpit and not the press room, stay with me. Subscribe, drop your thoughts. Tell me which era or aircraft you want to see pulled out of the shadows next. We'll keep digging up the missions that mattered but never made the poster. Thanks for staying till the end. Now let's make sure these quiet victories don't stay quiet forever.